Welcome back to History's Horrible Punishments. Today, we are going to take a look at possibly the most famous punishment from history, crucifixion. I am sure you all know the most famous victim of the crucifixion, but this method of punishment was used among many cultures and empires throughout history. For anyone who has been living a large portion of their life under a rock, I will quickly explain what a crucifixion is. The condemned is tied or nailed to a large wooden cross, beam, or stake, and left there to hang until their eventual death. What a brutal way to go. But how would someone actually die from this? Well, there are quite a few theories on what would actually finally bring death to the door of the condemned. The main theory that is normally given the credit is asphyxiation. This basically means that the condemned would not be able to breathe properly, and their body would run out of oxygen. Eventually, they would either slip into a coma or die. But other historians believe that the condemned would die from either heart failure, dehydration, sepsis, or even being stabbed to death by the guards. No matter what the final cause of death was, crucifixion was a slow and agonizing way to go. Let's take a quick look over some of the most famous cases of crucifixion from history. Obviously, there is the most famous example of all, which was the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Everyone knows that story. So let's take a bit of a deeper look into the archives of history and find some other examples. One of the earliest cases of the punishment comes from the king of the Persian Empire, Darius I, who in 521 BC defeated a revolt in the legendary city of Babylon. As a punishment for the revolt, Darius sentenced 3,000 of the defeated rebels to death by crucifixion, which, if you ask me, seems to be a tad excessive, but it pales in comparison to this next example. Spartacus was a Roman gladiator who instigated a massive slave revolt against the Roman Empire. After years of fighting, a Roman general called Marcus Licinius Crassus put an end to the rebellion after defeating Spartacus's army at Lucania in southern Italy. After the battle, Crassus ordered his troops to take 6,000 of Spartacus's forces and crucify them. 6,000 is a near impossible number of bodies and crosses to imagine, but what makes it even worse is that he ordered for them to be crucified along a 200-kilometer stretch of road connecting Capua to Rome. Our next brutal but interesting example comes from the one and only Alexander the Great. In 332 BC, Alexander laid siege to the city of Tyre in Lebanon. It took him 7 months to finally breach the fortifications, and he was not pleased with how long this victory took him. He seemed to then take his anger out on the population of the city by massacring 8,000 civilians, selling another 30,000 into slavery, and finally crucifying 2,000 more. Talk about anger issues. Crucifixion in ancient Rome was not as widespread as most people think. The punishment was reserved only for slaves, pirates, and enemies of the state. According to Roman law, if a slave killed his or her owner, then all of the owner's slaves would be crucified as punishment. One famous example of this comes from the Annals, written by Roman Senator Tacitus. In 61 AD, a Roman senator called Lucius Pedanius Secundus, what a mouthful that is, was murdered by one of his slaves. As was the law at the time, all 400 of his slaves, women and children included, were crucified as punishment for just one slave's actions. But enough about Europe. Let's take a quick trip to Japan, where crucifixion was still used on prisoners of war during World War II. Ringer Edwards was an Australian soldier who, along with the rest of his division, surrendered to the Japanese at the Battle of Singapore on the 15th of February 1942. He was sent to a forced labor camp where he and many other Allied prisoners were put to work building railway lines. The conditions were terrible and food was scarce. In an effort to provide more food for his comrades, he and 2 other prisoners killed some cattle. They were caught by the guards and sentenced to death. Luckily for Edwards, he managed to survive the ordeal, but his 2 comrades were not so lucky. I guess you're feeling pretty safe right now. I mean, I can't blame you. You're not a Roman slave or a World War II prisoner of war, so the chances of someone coming to crucify you are quite slim, to say the least. But sadly, as recently as 2019, a man was crucified on charges of terrorism in Saudi Arabia. Crucifixion has been a corner mark of punishment throughout our history, and hopefully soon it truly will be a thing of the past. Comment below if you think crucifixion is the worst of the worst when it comes to horrible punishments. If you don't, then let us know what you think deserves the title. And you never know, it might be the subject of our next video. And as always, please like and subscribe for more interesting tales from history.